Hi, Bath Book Bash. I'm so excited to be here with you. I'm Rajani LaRocca, and today on my video, I'm going to share with you about my book that is out already, Midsummer's Mayhem, as well as two of my forthcoming books, Seven Golden Rings, which is a picture book, and Red, White, and Whole, which is a middle grade novel. So first, Midsummer's Mayhem. So Midsummer's Mayhem is a middle grade novel, and it came out in June 2019. And it is the story of an 11-year-old girl named Mimi, who is the youngest of a family with four children. She's got an older brother and two older sisters who are good at all kinds of things. And Mimi feels a little bit lost and forgotten in her own family because her siblings are so talented and she feels like she's never going to be that talented at anything. And in case you can't tell, Mimi loves to bake. So she goes to a new local bakery and finds out that they're going to have a kids baking contest that summer. And Mimi feels like if she could just win the contest, she can finally prove that she's not the least talented member of her family. So she decides to do that, but she then her dad comes back from a business trip, and he is a food writer, so he's supposed to be really good at all kinds of cooking related things, including helping her develop recipes. But he comes back from a business trip, and he can't tell the difference between delicious food and disgusting food, and starts eating everything in sight in really disgusting combinations. So without his help, Mimi doesn't know how she could possibly win the contest. Then she follows some mysteriously familiar music into the woods behind her house, and there she meets a boy named Vic, who also loves to bake. And together, they gather all kinds of interesting ingredients from the woods and then bake with them. And then everyone around Mimi starts acting really, really strange. So Mimi's got to figure out what's wrong with everyone. Can she fix it? And can she find a way to win the contest? Now, the things that I wanted to talk to you about today, about this book, include my inspiration for it and also a central metaphor in the book. So, my inspiration for Midsummer's Mayhem came from a childhood memory. So, my dad didn't travel that much, but sometimes when he did, he was gone for up to a week. And I had an overactive imagination, and I always wondered, what if the person who comes back looks exactly like my dad, but isn't really my dad? How would I know the difference? So I would like concoct these kind of quizzes that only my real dad would know the answers to. So uh, and then I would give them to him kind of in a subtle way. And luckily, he always knew the answers, and it really was my dad. But when it came time to write this book, I thought to myself, what if there were a girl whose dad comes back from a business trip acting really strange, and there is something wrong with him? And then I was like, hmm. And then I kind of kept thinking, and I was like, well, what is wrong with him? And, I was like, of course it's something magical because that's fun. Um, and then I kind of figured out what that might be like. And then I was like, well, why is this girl the only one in her family who notices that there's something wrong with him? And uh, I thought, oh, well, maybe if she has a big family, and she's the one that's closest to her dad, then she's the one that like, is like notices that there's something wrong with him because she was planning on spending time with him and he's, acting strange, and everyone else is just really busy with their own stuff. Um, so I combined that with um, I knew there was something magical happening in the story, and I thought, well, maybe it has something to do with the woods because I think the woods are kind of a place where magical stuff happens. And I live in a town where we have lots of beautiful woods where I think that magical stuff could happen. So I took that and I was like, oh, something magical in the woods. What if there are fairies involved here? And then I was like, that's it. Shakespeare's play A Midsummer Night's Dream has magical woods with magical fairies in it. What if I combine the ideas and you add in my slight obsession with baking and you get Midsummer's Mayhem? So, in order to kind of illustrate a little bit about the central metaphor of baking and what that means to my main character, Mimi, in the story, I wanted to read you a little excerpt from the book. So this is Mimi at the bakery, the new bakery in town. It's called the While Away Cafe, and she gets to meet the owner because one of the employees has determined that Mimi has some expertise about baking, so they want her help at the bakery. A few minutes later, Peas Blossom reappeared and led me into a small office at the back of the cafe. I found myself standing before a beautiful young woman with a river of dark hair. She turned the pages of a book while seated on a velvet chair behind a worn wooden desk. A bowl of pink roses sat on the desk and filled the small space with a heady, sweet scent. And in the spiced Indian air by night, full often hath she gossiped by my side, the woman said in a low, melodious voice like a perfectly played oboe. Excuse me? Um, Peas Blossom said you wanted to talk to me. The woman closed the book gently and looked at me with bright green eyes that matched the flowing dress she was wearing. I'm Mrs. T, the owner of the While Away. I hear you're quite the baking master. She sat very straight and still. I shrugged. I like to bake for my friends and family. Not that any of them noticed, except for Mom and Dad, and they didn't count. Please, my dear, do take a seat. She motioned to a stool. More like a tree stump, I realized as I sat. I don't doubt you're better than this sorry lot. She waved at what I assumed must be the door to the kitchen, where I could hear pots and pans being banged around, followed by a loud screech. Peas Blossom squeaked, then looked at the ground. There was an awkward silence. It's hard to bake if you don't know what you're doing, I said, and Mrs. T narrowed her eyes. Well, that sounded obnoxious. I mean, my dad always says that baking requires precision. Your father is a baker of renown? No, he's a food writer. He works for Culinary Adventures, the online magazine. He also sometimes writes features for the Comedy Journal. Mrs. T looked at me blankly. She was clearly very new in town. Anyway, he's a great taste tester. He helps me improve my recipes. Mrs. T arched an eyebrow. Her moss-colored eyes bored into me like she could read my mind. And what, pray tell, is your name, my young friend? Mimi Maxon. I shifted in my seat so I didn't have to look her straight in the eyes. Well, Mimi Maxon, tell me what you like to bake. Lots of things. Brownies, cookies, pies, tarts, scones. But cupcakes are my favorite. I like to flavor them with unusual spices and herbs. I see. And what's the last thing that you made? Double chocolate brownies with cinnamon and cayenne to welcome someone home. And prior to that, cheddar chive biscuits. She waved her hand in front of her face, like she had smelled something bad. No, no, my word, that will not do at all. Just sweet things, please. She stood and paced behind the desk. Ha! Cheese and chives. I wouldn't dream of baking, eating, or even serving those, not to win the world. Well, that was strange. Sweet isn't sweet without savory. One isn't good without the other. I thought everyone knew that. Even the most sugary dessert needs a dash of salt. So that's a little excerpt. In case you couldn't tell, Mrs. T is not a regular person. Um, and but that illustrates a little bit of the metaphor of baking in the story. And it's something that Mimi kind of knows already about baking, that she kind of learns a little bit more about life. Mimi understands that you can't just have one kind of taste in baking or cooking. You can't just have sweet without anything else. Things would be unbalanced and they wouldn't taste as good. And by the end of the story, she realizes that maybe that's true about life as well, that things can't only be sweet. So, the second book I wanted to talk to you about is my debut picture book called Seven Golden Rings, A Tale of Music and Math. And this is coming out on October 27th. Now, this story is about uh, a boy named Bhagat who lives in ancient India, and he's poor and he wants to improve his family's fortunes by winning a place in the Raja's court. The Raja is the king, as a singer because he loves to sing and he thinks he's talented enough to be a singer for the king. Um, but all his family has left in the world is a single rupee coin and a ring, a chain of seven tiny golden rings, which you can see him holding on the cover there. He gets to the Raja city and he has to figure out a place to stay. So he wants to stay at an inn, and the innkeeper says that each night will require one ring in payment. Now, it may take up to 7 nights for Bhagat to finally get in front of the Raja to sing for him. Um, but he doesn't know. It may only take 2 nights. So he asks if he can just pay when he's done, when he knows he's going to leave. And unfortunately, he can't. So they need him to pay in advance, and he needs to pay one ring at a time. So he goes to a goldsmith, and he finds out that he can break one link with one coin, and he only has one coin. So how is he going to break that chain of seven with just one link broken and pay for his stay one ring at a time without overpaying at all? So there's a little bit of a math puzzle in this book. And at the end, there is an author's note that explains binary numbers. Now, the idea for this book, the inspiration for this book, came from my son, who has loved math since he was very, very tiny, and loved the picture book One Grain of Rice, which has to do with powers of two. And in my family, when I was a kid and when my kids were little, we used to always tell each other puzzles and riddles and try and work things out and kind of learn from each other in that way. So I took an old logic puzzle that I had learned when I was really young and kind of expanded on it and built an entire story around it. Now, in terms of metaphors, the central metaphor in this story is music, and how music relates to math, and how Bhagat uses the fact that he loves music and thinking about music and how to break up measures in music, and kind of uses that metaphor in how to figure out this math puzzle. So I wanted to read a little bit of it and show you bits of the book because it's so beautiful. It's illustrated by Archana Srinivasan. And here we go. So here's a little bit of Seven Golden Rings. Long ago, there lived a kind Raja who ruled over vast lands. He loved music and gathered the finest players and singers to perform in his court. But the Raja had no interest in planning or calculating, and did not manage his kingdom's food stores and accounts. And so his people suffered. Bhagat and his mother lived in a dusty village in the far corner of the Raja's kingdom. Their days were filled with toil and hunger, but they planned and saved to make their meager means stretch further. And Bhagat, who loved to sing, filled their nights with song. Now, the third page I'm going to show you is after Bhagat decides to go and his journey. Now, look at this beautiful artwork here. Bhagat sang as he walked all day. In his head, he heard a rhythm of whole notes, tan, and half notes, da, da, and quarter notes, da, ga, da, ga. So many ways to divide a whole. As long as Bhagat had music, he never felt alone. So yeah, Bhagat loves music, and because he thinks about music a lot and doesn't mind calculating, he uses his knowledge of music to figure out how to divide the chain of seven rings in order to stay and sing for the Raja. Hi. So the third book I wanted to talk to you about is my forthcoming middle grade novel and verse called Red, White, and Whole, and it is coming on February 2nd, 2021. Now, Red, White, and Whole is the story of Reha, who is a 13-year-old girl. She's the daughter of Indian immigrants, and this story is set in 1983. So she lives in a small Midwestern city, and Reha is torn between the worlds of her parents and their immigrant community and her school and 1980s pop culture. Then her mother gets really sick, and she's torn in a different way. So this novel, and this is a novel in verse, so it's written in poetry. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about the inspiration for this book. And the interesting thing to me is that the inspiration and the metaphor were the same thing. So this book was inspired by emotions that I felt when I was a kid growing up in a small Midwestern city in the 1980s. The sense of living in two worlds, of kind of having behaving one way or feeling one way or thinking about yourself in one way when you were at home or with your immigrant community, and feeling a completely different way and feeling different from everybody else when you were at school. So I used some things from my own life in this story, but it is a work of fiction. And honestly, it came to me as a metaphor. And the metaphor is blood. And so if you look at the cover, there are kind of petals on her dress, and they float, they seem to be floating up into the sky. And those are actually blood cells. So blood has something to do with what's wrong with Reha's mom. But blood also has to do with kind of who we are as people, and what it means to be related to someone, what it means to be in a family. Um, and so that idea kind of informed the entire story. So I wanted to read to you just a few poems from the book to give you an idea of what it is like. This is the beginning of the book. 2. I have 2 lives, one that is Indian, one that is not. I have 2 best friends, one who is Indian, one who is not. At school, I swim in a river of white skin and blonde hair and brown hair and blue eyes and green eyes and hazel, school subjects and giggles about boys, salad and sandwiches. And on weekends, I float in a sea of brown skin and black hair and dark eyes, MTV music videos and giggles about boys, samosas and subjis. In both places, I have gossip and laughter, music and silence, friendship. But only in one place do I have my parents. And here is another poem. This was one of the first poems I wrote, and it's actually the same as the title of the book. Red, White, and Whole. Reha's mom is called Amma. That's what she calls her. It basically means mom. Amma works in the hematology lab at the hospital. She spins the blood and counts the cells in the complete blood count. She counts the red cells that carry oxygen, the platelets that stop bleeding, and the white cells, the warriors protecting us from invaders. At least, if they're doing what they're supposed to do. Cells and plasma together are called whole blood, which is what flows inside us. Red, white, and whole, the precious river in our arteries, our veins, our hearts. And then the last poem I want to read to you is called The River, and it is another poem. It was one of the first ones that I wrote as well. The river. Blood. Metallic and earthy, essential, cleansing, the river of life in our veins. Blood binds us to each other as humans, as kin, parent to child. Thicker than water, it tells all. The stories of our ancestors are written there. But what happens when your own blood betrays you? So as you can see there, I took the metaphor of blood, which is a literal thing, obviously, the cells that are in our body that deliver oxygen and fight off viruses and bacteria. And then I turned it into something like a river of life in our veins, and the idea of being related to people. And so at the end, when I asked the question of what do you do when your own blood betrays you, part of it is literally kind of there's something wrong with Amma's blood. And part of it is that Reha feels guilty that she's acted in ways that didn't make her parents happy and that she's somehow the cause of a problem in their life. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed talking to you about it, and I'm looking forward to having it out in the world in February. Thank you. Rajani LaRocca saying bye.